Hi, ever wonder what it's like to work another profession or live in the underworld? Listen to unsuspecting riders give a 10 to 15 minute personal masterclass as I spontaneously interview them as they enter my taxi. I'm your host, Simon Rushton, and this is Taxi Chronicles. Here we go. So you were explaining about realizing things later.
Yeah.
So what I was going to say also is I met a lady I had a customer the other day, and she was talking about the difference between London and where she's from in Reading. Not Reading, Bristol. Yeah, Bristol. Okay. She is talking about an incident she had with the police, and she was in a party, like a West End club, and she's with her sister. Now she's mixed race.
Okay. And
she said, and there's a reason why I tell you this, and she was with her sister. I don't know if her sister is darker than her, but she's really thick. And there's a guy who tried to stab her. Okay. And it all erupted because he was taking photos of the sister and of the girl, and the sister noticed. So the sister said, "What are you doing? You can't take photos of people like that kind of thing. Leave it alone." The guy got upset, tried to stab her. I don't know where, whatever. Yeah. But the thing got confrontational quite quickly because the sister's quite verbal. Now, the police come and they went to arrest her. Yeah, the girl who was nearly stabbed.
Okay, and this was in London?
This was in London. Now, the sister, the woman who's telling me, let's call her Julie for argument's sake. Yeah. She's saying, what's she saying now? She was really plastered, she said. So she was trying to just lean on the wall to prop herself up to try and see her. But the police thought she was okay, but she must be calm. She's calm, so they talked to her. But she couldn't. Someone's trying to talk to you, and they can't. She's not really registering, and that kind of thing. But the thing is, she said they went straight to arrest the woman, her sister, because she said, I assume I think she did say because she was black or brown or coloured or whatever, that kind of thing. So, but the guy who tried to stab her was in a bow tie and a suit. Okay. And I was like, really? Okay. And the police didn't want to arrest him. And based on why I'm telling you that story is because it's like she was talking about observations, and she's talking about her experience of living in Bristol and coming here. And she's saying she would have been, glad she wasn't brought up in London, because London's a place where you get a lot of trauma, but you realise later on. And it made me think, because I know I'm going around the houses here.
Yeah, that's fine.
But it made me think because obviously I'm born and bred London, born in Brixton, but it's like I didn't look at all these after effects that you have from your experiences in life. So going back to what you were saying earlier on about when I told you about the girl who got raped or the guy who had the drugs, it's like it's starting to make me look at things from a different angle. If you say it, there's no real question in this, but I don't know why. It's just me I'm thinking out loud, really, in observation. But you were teaching me about, you were speaking on that counselling about how things affect you later in life.
Well, sometimes when you're involved in something, if you have a childhood trauma at the time, because it's the only experience you've had, you don't know any different. So then it's only really later on when you maybe coerce with other people about their experiences that you realise that your experience is probably not right, and you realise that actually, wow, on a wider level, what I experienced is just not. It's not what someone should go through. But if it's the only experience you've ever had, you wouldn't know that, and you wouldn't be able to comprehend the difference. So then maybe the level of understanding of what they've experienced comes later on through, when they maybe get old enough to experience their own form of life. Maybe they've moved out and they're meeting different people, different type of people, and they meet other people's families, other people's parents, and they realise actually, and this could be early teens, or it could be late teens, or it could be early 20s, but they realise that actually what I've gone through is not what normal people experience. In terms of what you just explained, I think sometimes in London there's a different, like, people of colour are viewed differently statistically as they are in other parts of the country. So I would say that the police in various parts of the country would probably treat people who are mixed or black differently than they would do in London, because in London there's kind of a message that there's a real issue with gun culture and there's a real issue with gangs, and then there's a kind of messaging that we're going to clamp down on these things. So I think what the police are pressured into kind of feeling like they have to really set an example, and that comes from the top. So the messaging filters down, and I think that what you obviously get is disproportionate kind of stopping and all these kind of things. And that same person wouldn't experience the same in a place like Bristol, because in Bristol the messaging that comes from local government is much more kind of like consistent, because there isn't the pressure to kind of and I think this is the thing, is that people are scared in society, and then they want the government to seem like they're doing something, and then the government disproportionately kind of if you're a young black boy in London, you're going to get stopped significantly more than if you're white. And this girl as a mixed race girl, she grew up in a small town, in a small village. She would never experience the same things she would in London, and her life would be shaped very differently.
That's what I found strange, because when she said that, I thought, really? I thought there'd be worse, but she said no, she never had that. And she mentioned this thing called colorism, which I've never heard before. And she's saying that there's issues with colorism in London and what have you. I didn't know anything about that. But she said the worst thing was the police didn't even arrest the other guy. Yeah. They just, at one point he said, "This is totally unacceptable," and took off his glasses and stepped on them.
But it's perception, isn't it? For instance, I can give you an example of that. There was a story where a person was one of the greatest violin players in the world, and they were playing at like the Royal Albert Hall in a show, and they wanted to show how people sometimes would look at somebody and judge them. So in the afternoon, they took loads of clothes on. They took their clothes off, and they basically dressed up to appear like they were homeless. And they sat next to where the theatre was going to be, and they played the same violin they'd play in the evening, and no one wanted to stop for them. But then they put that suit on, and people paid £200 to hear the same set that same evening. And so the reality is that people see what they want to see. What they saw was a homeless person begging, but actually what they were listening to was the greatest violin player in the world. And then what they saw in the evening is we've paid for a show, and this is who we are, and we're going to go and see the greatest violin player in the world. And the truth is it was the same person, but they had a different outfit on.
Yeah. That's like, I interviewed a guy who was selling sunglasses, and they're weird. You know, like Star Trek, and they have the line sunglasses?
Yeah.
He was selling things like that, and he said they're normally like £25 or even £50 at the most. But when he does London Fashion Week, he sells them for 500, and they go like hotcakes. Because they won't buy them if you say 50 quid.
No, absolutely, yeah. It's perception, isn't it? Going back to what you said about like talking about race and stuff like that, one thing I think is interesting is that I think if you grow up in London and you're whether you're black or you're mixed, whatever you are, I think sometimes like they're more likely to be in touch with their heritage. And I think that like there's more kind of, it's more embedded. Whereas I think what happens is if somebody is like, say, mixed or they're black and they grew up in a very small village somewhere, what you tend to find is that like, because everybody else is maybe white, sometimes they're they may be more likely to kind of think, oh, I'm not going to have like afro hair. I'm going to have straight hair because all my friends have got straight hair. And so what happens is it works in the reverse, where reason why I say a young girl might grow up in a small village is she might end up just having like straight hair and being quite. Does that make sense? Like, whereas in London, people are more.
You're describing her basically.
They're more proud of their heritage. So you'll get people in, like, if you look at Notting Hill Carnival, it's a celebration of black culture all over from the Caribbean, but it spreads from all over the world.
Yeah.
But if you grow up in a small town somewhere and you're the only kid that's mixed race, you're maybe gonna kind of try and merge in with your friends. So you don't necessarily celebrate that side of things. You more embrace the other side of things because it's more about acceptance and fitting in.
Yeah.
And so I think that sometimes people's experiences can be also based on that, how they feel and how comfortable they feel in the society they live. So for instance, if you grow up in Brixton and all of your friends listen to a certain type of music, and at the weekends you're all going to go to like a show, and there's going to be a grime show, and then on the Sunday you're going to go to all these kind of things. Whereas if you grow up in like in a tiny little town in Kent, in a village, and all your friends listen to like
latest pop or
folk music or something, and then you go to school and you're a minority, you're going to kind of sometimes veer towards that because it's just like, I don't want to be like different,
I understand that.
And I think that what I'm trying to say is there's also a misconception a lot from police sometimes about music, and what the messages that music, it's ridiculous as it sounds, like if in Bristol, for instance, all the party scene is very hippie-ish. So if that girl went to a party in Bristol, the police see them as a bit like, oh well, they get drunk or whatever, but they're harmless. Whereas if the police invaded a grime party in London, they have an instant perception of what that means.
Yeah, that's going to be a problem. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Whereas like if she's grown up in Bristol, I've been in a pub in Bristol before where people are smoking weed in the pub, and the police have come in and they've said, oh, be careful doing that. There's cameras. So they've actually, so they've told them to like go outside and do it. Yeah. They haven't even taken it off them because they're just like, they can't be bothered because there isn't the pressure to like stop the drug problem, and they just see them as harmless kids. And I think that that's a big thing as well. It's like the way things are seen. You mentioned Bristol a lot. I spent a lot of time in Bristol, and I think Bristol is a place where the police are very kind of chilled in Bristol.
You know what? It's funny you say that because I've interviewed 4 policemen. One is an old school policeman who's retired 15 years ago, was a policeman during the 70s, up to minus 15 years from now. And what he had to say was very interesting. Then there was a fresher, I'm not sure if you call it fresher, rookie policeman. But there's 2 policemen were from London, and the other 2 were outside of London. One had just come to start to work in London. But the one from Leeds, she said, what she noticed with police in London, I'll put it reverse. She said the police in the other areas outside of London, when there's a situation, they try to resolve it without having to arrest anybody.
Yeah.
They say, guys, can you calm down, go home, take him home, that kind of thing. But the police in London want to beat everybody up.
Yeah, of course.
And she said she doesn't understand it. She's looking like, why would you do this? Because you're creating more paperwork and all these kind of things, and you're causing bad feeling. And it's funny, the last policeman I interviewed, when I say interviewed, I do everything off record. He was saying that since he's come to London, and because originally you can't be a policeman in London if you're not from London.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, now they've opened it up. So they said if you're not from London, you can come and work here. So he's a career policeman. He's going to be a career policeman, he said. So he sees lots of behaviour. He was complaining about how, as police, they're probably the most hated people in the country right now. And I said, it's funny you say that because it occurred to me that you guys are, and it's across the board. It's not one group of people now. It's everybody's upset with you.
Yeah.
And I said, the only person you're probably who's not more upset than you is the government.
Yeah.
Yeah, the people more upset with the government they are with the police, but you lot enforce the government's thing. But then you do it in a bullyish way when you're in London, because I see when I'm driving and stuff. And he agreed, but he said it's hard because as a new policeman, you're with someone who's done the job 20 years and he wants to do it his way.
Yeah.
You've got to follow his lead because
Absolutely.
It's a new crew and you don't know, so you kind of adapt.
Yeah.
But then he also spoke about some police are reacting on fear because they had a situation and it went badly for them and they don't want that to happen again.
Absolutely.
But then I would say it's still...
But you have to, I'm not defending that, but I think it's important to balance things, isn't it? Because you have to understand why people behave a certain way. And I do think that because they're so undermanned in London, if you consider like they've got 20,000 less police than they did 10 years ago, 20,000 less.
Mm-hmm.
The attacks on police officers went up by 600% in the last 2 years. You know, you're getting police officers like the one in Maidenhead where they tied him to a car and then they drove him around until all his legs basically exploded and all that kind of
Really?
stuff.
I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, he got killed because they kind of tied him to a car. But the point was is that he'd called for backup, but the time for backup arriving now is like 3 times longer than it used to be because there's less police. And so I think that there's these situations now where...
That must have been something personal though.
No, they'd stolen some stuff. They were young boys, and they're basically like, they didn't intend to kill him. They tied him to it to have a bit of fun, but it got out of hand. But the point was, is like, you know, he was on his own.
Was this recently?
About 2 years ago, and he died. And he called for backup, but the backup didn't arrive in time. So the backup just arrived to see a guy dead on the floor. And the point is that like, you know, when you've got 20,000 less police officers than you had 10 years ago, you know, you've got a situation where there's more drugs and more crime, but there's less police officers. So you're going one way and you're going another. You know, you've got less people. And what's happening is that people are realising that there's less police and they're exploiting the situation. And I think that what's happening is that rightfully or wrongfully, the police are just getting to a point where they're actually ruling by fear now. You know, they go into a job and they generally like, because as I say, attacks on police officers have gone up by 600%. So if you work statistically now, if you work in a police station, you will know at least one police officer who gets attacked every week. So every single week, you know, one of your colleagues is going to be struck or hit or, you know, and I think that's quite different than, so you talk about these maybe police officers from 20, 30 years ago, but the mould is quite different now, you know, and I think that what's happening is that like, they're now overcompensating. They're kind of saying, you know, I'm doing a job and I shouldn't have to put up with this. And, you know, they're going in quite hard because they're fear, you know, and that's what people do. When people are scared, they kind of like
Yeah, I know what
panic,
you're saying. Yeah,
you know?
people, when they don't understand, they always react in a way that's not too constructive. I hear what you're saying. I don't dispute that. I would say this though. From what the old school policeman said to me, he said, originally, he used to be a policeman in Kennett, and he said you have to walk the beat, and there'd be an area, let's say the size of Kennett, and they'd be divided up into 20 patches. Yeah. So he would walk one patch in that area, and everything that goes on, he knows. Yeah. So, for instance, if he saw a kid doing such, he'd say, "Hey, Kev, behave yourself," and Kev goes, kind of thing, and then, "It's all right, don't worry, I'm not going to chase you. Yeah. I'm going to talk to your old man."
Yeah, I understand.
And the old man, you know, go home and say, "This is what he's done," and they give him a slap and they say, "All right, don't worry, if he does anything, let me know." But then they changed that, and what the government said, "Okay, you got Kennington, but we're going to just divide it up into 2 patches, and you've got 1 policeman for each patch." They just done away with all that, and he said that was, and then he said on top of that, they lowered the standard of becoming a policeman. So you don't have to be so educated. Yeah. And the fitness level wasn't a thing, and it's just like more, you could say, equal opportunity. It's not diversity. Yeah. And he said the problem with that, the people who would make good policemen don't come in. Yeah. And the people who don't understand want to use aggression. Yeah. Because they don't understand. Now, fast forward to this last policeman I interviewed who come from up north and is working in London now. He was saying how now they've gone back to having a hard exam. You have to have a degree. And he said he sits there and sees people struggling with understanding the law and what they can and can't do. Yeah. And so, to me, that is a big issue. Because if you can't understand that, the basics of the law, but you're meant to implement it. And he said these are things, he said, they're not, some people are not getting, not all of them. He said some people are not getting, but they're not being thrown out. Do you see what I mean? And so things like that. And the last thing is that driving around in cars. They're driving around in cars in mass numbers. They're not walking the beat as they used to. So there's no connection with the locals. Yeah. So you're just an authoritarian because you don't understand who's who and what's what. Regardless of the demographics of people you're working with, you're just handling everything on one basis. Yeah. Aggression. And this is why I say I don't think the police should have guns. Because I see the amount of times I see them pulling out stun guns or jumping on people.
Yeah.
I think if that's how quickly you get to violence, aggression, imagine if you had a gun.
No, absolutely.
You'd just be really. People would have to be lying down when you turn around because you'd be shooting left, right, and centre.
Well, like America.
Yeah, and I don't. I used to think the police. Someone said to me years ago, the British police are the best police in the world, and they said because they have to talk to you because they don't have the tools to use the violence.
Yeah, that's true.
And I thought about it, and I thought, you know what, he's spot on. Regardless of all the issues that we've had with them as a black culture to them, generally, I've been places around the world, there's a lot worse police.
Oh, of course, yeah, of course.
There's a lot worse police. And I'm not just talking about America, I can show you places in Africa where they're terrible. Yeah?
No, of course, yeah.
But now that's kind of going.
Yeah.
Because they're using force and they're using the electric, the voltage guns and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
And stuff.
I agree.
Yeah, but I don't know. Have you ever had any altercations with police?
Not so much. My partner's black, and she has.
Okay.
You know, and I know that she would know of a lot more people that have had negative experience than I have. Probably because, you know, because I'm a white guy and I actually grew up in a small town in Kent, so you know, I didn't really experience loads of crime then. You know, from living in London, like, it hasn't been something that's really affected me, but like I know of a lot of people that have been affected, and they usually are of some sort of colour. But yeah, obviously, I think, as I say, I think a lot. It's like London has become a place where it's ruled by, even with the pandemic, it's very different in a lot of parts of the country where there's more of a kind of casual. London is quite a chaotic place, and people's emotions come through very. So I think that, you know, everything is very heightened here, for one reason or another. You know, they sort of say cities are alive. That's what I think about London. I feel like, you know, things are very kind of. If you've got a situation in London, it's massively heightened compared to other places because. I also think that people in London, they even if it's, you were talking about things like YouTubing earlier, people in London, they want to set a sort of level of bar, you know. So even if you look at fashion, people will move to London because it's London. People will pay $2,000 to live in an apartment because it's in London. If the same place, if it was in Shrewsbury, would cost 4 times less, but they want to live in a flat in a certain part of London because it's like the way they want to live their life. And I think that kind of filters across in everything. So even with crime, I think people would if they want to commit crime, they want to commit it in London because there's a kind of almost like there's negative stigma and positive stigma of crime, isn't there? And people look at London as being kind of like
the career criminal.
Yeah, no, but
you're gonna be a criminal. You're a big time criminal in London, then you're something.
The thing about London is you can get lost. You know, you've got 7 million people, so there are people who live here that the government don't even know about, and there are people who, you know, all the things are trafficking.
So there's a missing 2 million, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And because of that, there's an underworld of crime that we don't even know about. There's things going on in London every day that we have no idea. I guarantee you, there's some stuff that's so dark that they couldn't even talk about it, you know, because Lord knows what like politicians are involved in, and you know, whether it's paedophile rings, whether it's sex trafficking, young girls. But these things are far bigger than we realise, you know, I think. And there's a whole world in London that we don't see every day. And it's because when you've got a city this size with 7 million people, you can do things and be invisible. Whereas if you live in a small town and you're the drug dealer, everybody knows, the drug dealer Dave, Dave's the guy. If you want drugs, you go to Dave. You know, there's this thing where everybody, and then also they'll come and tell your parents. They'll knock your door and say, you realise your son's doing this. Because in small towns, people know each other. And they know each other's names.
Business as well.
And even school teachers, they'll know your parents, because your parents, maybe sometimes they just know them because they live near them.
Same gym or all
Yeah, exactly. Whereas in London, I think that, as I say, these things, it's so populated and it's so kind of mass that these things just go unnoticed.
It's funny you say that. I had a Romanian guy in the car yesterday.
Yeah.
He's really down to earth. I liked him, and he's saying how he'd gone for a job, but in Romania, he basically is just a drug dealer, and he said he was doing good, and he's making money, and he's looking after family members and what have you. But he said then things started to change. I can't remember what exactly changed, but he said everybody started to. He said, I think it got more risky. It got more risky, and people started to know him for that.
Yeah.
So he said he didn't want to get into the violence of the thing because there's competition. That's what he said about the competition. So he said his brother spoke about being in England because his brother was in England, so he come to England. And so I said, so what are you doing in England? Because he's gone for a construction job course. I just picked him up. He said, yes, I go for construction. I said, how come you don't do drugs here then? He said, no. I don't understand the language very well, and there's so many different kind of people.
Interesting.
So he's saying he's basically too many moving parts for him.
Yeah.
He's like, where are you from? What you say? No, I don't know. No. He said, no, I go construction.
That's so interesting. But also, I think there would probably be a situation where there would be, if you started doing it in a certain patch here, you'd have to answer very quickly to somebody else. Whereas, as I say, in other smaller places, you tend to just have your own little bit, and that'll be where you do these things. Whereas in London, if you move into an area and you decide, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, you'll very quickly realise that someone's already doing it, and they don't want you to do it here either. You know, he probably knows that if he's Romanian. You know, he's probably fully aware of the fact that it's not something that he can probably just start doing.
I had a Russian customer. See, all my stories are coming out here.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I had my Russian customer, and his dad was Russian, his mum was Ukrainian. And he was saying how his dad was a made man and had connections with the Russian mob or mafia thing. And he was selling drugs. His dad they were working from Ukraine, and they would have drugs. But then, because of the war, he said, because of the war, when they started, his dad sent a crew to Germany and a crew to London to set up.
Yeah.
But he's decided he wants to go his own way and prove himself. So he's working in construction. But it was very interesting hearing the story because he said at one point in Ukraine, some people decided that they wanted to have try and stop his dad from doing certain things, and he just phoned up Russia, and Russia made a phone call and sent some muscle men down. You know, the guys in leather jackets, and the problem went away very quickly.
Wow.
But it's like you don't know who you're sitting with in these cars. You know, it's
absolutely.
He's like. But the way he was talking is like a Russian accent. It was heavy, but it wasn't. He's quite a small guy as well. He looked like he can handle himself, but he didn't look like anything. That it was an interesting conversation when I heard that. It's interesting what people take up when they come here.
Absolutely.
Some people just say they do this.
Well, what's interesting about people who come from different countries as well is you'll get people who are like in Ecuador. They'll be a police officer, and then they'll come here and they'll work as a cleaner, because these things don't translate, you know. So like they'll be like, or they've been a nurse and they'll come here, but their qualifications there don't work here, so they have to retrain. So you get people that are like literally like doctors in a country, and then they come here and they have to work at the absolute bottom because we don't sort of perceive their qualifications at the level it should be. And I think that's kind of interesting as well, isn't it? How you can leave a country for a better life, and you're a doctor or something, and then you come here, and then basically they have to start from scratch. And I think that just shows a lot about kind of, you know, when you think about when the government kind of send this message that people are coming in and are only doing these low-paid jobs. What they don't tell you is that most of the people that are doing those low-paid jobs are actually very overqualified, and they're only doing those jobs because we've got very strict policies on what we'll accept, you know, and so they kind of create a scenario where they're kind of explaining something, but actually it's a very different thing altogether. That these people are actually quite skilled, but they're being made to work those jobs because, you know.
I think with the medical thing, I understand why they have those measures, because I've lived in Kenya for 5 years, and I tell you what...
Oh, my partner's from Kenya.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
What's she, Kikuyu?
Yes.
Okay. She's, sorry. So,
do you know what I think she is? She's going to kill me if she ever hears, you know, if I get that wrong. But I'm fairly certain she is. Whatever the president is what she is.
Oh yeah, Kikuyu.
Yeah.
She's definitely Kikuyu.
Yeah.
But I see corruption where you can buy degrees, you can buy anything, you buy your driver's license, buy all these things. So we have to have a filter system to make sure that people come over can do what they say they can do, and they're properly trained and have a proper understanding to that standard. So I agree with that. I'm not sure if it should be as expensive, but then I don't know. I suppose it's avoiding the back door of things. Yeah. If people find they can get in there. But yeah, I've spoken to all types of people. So how was Kenya? I've
never lived there, but like my partner lives here, so we go out and visit. Obviously, I've been there quite a few times.
Where did you go? Mombasa?
Nairobi, yeah. So she's from Nairobi, so she's there at the moment with our children. And I was meant to go, but because of the situation, I'm struggling a bit. So to get out there, but you know, I'm hoping to get out there soon. But yeah, she lives there at the moment. Well, not lives there, but she's just visiting her mum there.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I was in Mombasa.
Okay.
Yeah, because I like the hot weather.
I haven't been there yet.
And I like snorkeling and diving and the luxuries of life.
Are we close? Or?
Yep, we are. But okay, well, it's great talking to you.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Sorry.
We hope you liked that interview. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to get the latest daily episode. Ever considered investing in the continent with the fastest growing economy and population on Earth? The same continent that holds 30% of the world's known natural resources? Then listen to our sister podcast, Africa Investor Stories, where you will hear real investors with real stories from around the world share their experience of investing in Africa. We post Monday and Thursday at 10 a.m.